Hello there, and welcome back. This is my new show, Who is Better? Now, in this modern day and age of us, we are almost practically drowning in books, TV shows, games, and films. And it should be no surprise to anyone that we end up eventually with things sharing similar themes or even subject matter. And this is what my show is all about. I'm going to be discussing and sharing my feelings about who does these sort of similarities better. Now, I would like to discuss two of my most favorite science fiction and horror films, Alien and The Thing. I'm only going to be comparing the two original films, not their sequels or anything else that expands the plot. Now, I want to make this very clear. I love both of these films. They're honestly amazing and should be checked out. But one, in my honest opinion, just does the horror better than the other one. I'm going to explain that, but let me first introduce the two films to refresh your memory. Aliens came out in the 1979, directed by Ridley Scott. It follows Ripley and her fellow crewmates on a commercial space tug, the Nostromo. On their return to Earth was the 7 crewmates basically in stasis. Everything is going well until the ship's computer, for whatever strange reason is called Mother, detects a transmission from a nearby moon and wakes up the crew, leading to one of the male crew members discovering an alien ship and a catacomb-like structure was in the ship holding several large, like egg objects, which eventually, in classical horror fashion, the other crewmates soon discover too late that it was a warning, which ends up to the male crew member being raped by a creature coming out of the egg. Now, I know some people take offense to that word, but here's my argument. Have you looked at that thing? It clearly has a vagina and a dick. And I don't mean to be that crass, but honestly, I can't be the only one who can't see that. Anyway, so this unfortunately leads to the poor fellow's death as a creature pops out of his chest and basically begins to hunt down the crew members who are still surviving. The Thing came out in the 1982, directed by the late, great John Carpenter. And some people consider this to be a remake of another film called The Thing from Another World. Both of these films were based on the novella Who Goes There, but I'm not really here to compare those two films. I'm here to compare the one I previously mentioned. Anyway, the film follows MacReady and his own fellow colleagues working at an American Arctic station. Their monotony is interrupted when a Norwegian helicopter basically comes towards them, hunting down a sled dog of all things. When it lands, one of the members of the Norwegian team basically tries to throw a bomb at the dog, but unfortunately, thanks to snow gloves, he basically fumbles and the bomb basically kills him. The surviving Norwegian basically starts shouting something at them. Unfortunately, no one can speak Norwegian, and basically, unfortunately, shoots one of their, workers, and unfortunately leads to his death. Trying to figure out what the heck was just going on, several of them leave to check out the Norwegian station, only to find the charred remains of the station and several bodies, a large ice cube, and basically an alien spaceship. With all this weirdness going down, they really need a break, only to unfortunately discover that sled dog that they were hunting was for a good reason why they were hunting it. It turns out that it was actually basically taken over by a microscopic alien organism, and begins trying to assimilate the other sled dogs in their station. This eventually, however, is basically put to halt when the thing is basically burned to death by a flamethrower. With this horrific discovery, the crew the colleagues, great, I'm getting the two things confused, the working colleagues soon discover to their horror that it may not just be a sled dog that may be infected. There may be also someone else who may be also infected among them. Now, as much as I love these two films, I'm really just gonna hurt me to say this, but I just feel like the Aliens horror is not that really interesting when you really get down to the nuts and bolts. Hear me out before you start grinding your pitchforks. Now, when you really get down to it, Alien follows two primary themes: claustrophobia and being chased by a monster. Now, the claustrophobia element is quite unique in horror films. It's not often very explored, and is done amazingly well with the set design, lighting, and even music. And the various people playing in this film do an amazing job of fleshing out the characters. But here's the thing. The alien itself in the movie, really well designed, and especially a lot of thanks to the late deceased H.R. Giger, the famous Swiss painter for his biomechanical sort of horrific artwork, is kind of rather a bit basic for a monster. It mostly follows a very classical rule that we've seen in a lot of horror movies and especially in certain slasher films. This idea of a safe environment not being so safe anymore and basically hunting down our main characters. It even has a signature killing move with its weird little mouth thing. And while there are some pretty interesting moments with it, like the fact that it basically transforms from something small to something much more larger, and basically has as the blood is suddenly fascinating, it just mostly just hunts them down and just kills them. And this is not really interesting when you really get down to the nuts and bolts about this sort of horror story. While it is all well done, it's kind of rather basic. Now, The Thing, on the other hand, in my honest opinion, has a far much more interesting horror story and is far much more terrifying just because of what the concept presents to us. And that is the idea of this creature that is basically a body snatcher. This is nothing new in horror, as we have seen body snatchers in a lot of science fiction stories. But the way this one presents it is not one of a question of morality, or basically used as an example for communism, which was a very popular statement back when that genre first popped up. This thing is just purely there for horror, and using the very interesting horror element of basically psychological. Because this film deals heavily with paranoia. Because we as a species work really well together, especially facing any sort of threat. And this is a very common placement in a lot of horror movies, where a lot of the horror can be easily sometimes, well, I shouldn't say easily dealt with, but often having more people to help you often helps you in your situation. However, when you can't fairly even trust your own fellow human beings, not knowing if they're even human, or could be the thing, this leads to some really interesting and terrifying moments. And this is what the film does really well. It betrays each character, and you're not really sure who you can really trust. And this especially comes really interesting when you rewatch the film. And this is something I don't feel like Alien quite does this very well. While there is a certain plot that does kind of use this, it's not on the same level as it's done in The Thing. And this is where I think the film really shines, especially in its alien design. While Alien is itself pretty damn terrifying, The Thing is just way more horrific in its concept. This thing is basically a microorganism, and its true form is too small for really the human eye to see. And because of this, you cannot really tell who's infected until the thing feels threatened. And when it does feel threatened, it basically warps the host's body into such a horrific state, with all its limbs and orifices beginning to grow. It is just something purely out of a nightmare. And given the fact that this thing shows such a high level of intelligence, it's even more frightening. Well, the thing will go back to a very basic sort of animal instinctualistic sort of style of defending itself when it is threatened. It has ever, though through the entire film, has shown incredible intelligence. There's several scenes where this thing has turned many of the crewmates against each other, or has used certain methods to basically hinder their own needs, or methods of finding out who is the thing. And this is why I feel like The Thing is a much better horror movie than Aliens. I'm sorry for the terrible stumbling in my words of this video, but I hope you enjoy it. And maybe it's not the best video, but I think I'm just hoping this will start an interesting concept, because I've seen a lot of videos where they're more talking about who would win in a fight rather than really talking about which film does the horror better. Anyway, I will be back to do another one of these videos, with the next one being about who is the better adult show, South Park or The Simpsons?